This is Mike Sager, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
You've done a lot of wild stuff. I was talking with our good friend Scott Husing about you, and he was, prompting me on some things we may want to talk about. We both have had these lives where you look around and you're like, I can't believe I just did whatever that thing was. Whether it's war stuff or talking to, you've talked to a lot of famous musicians. I've talked to a lot of famous musicians. Did you design your life to have these kind of, I don't know what's going to happen next, but not surprised when it does kind of moments?
I mean, no, I was like totally unconscious until somewhere in my early 20s. I woke up and I was in my third week of law school at Georgetown Law Center in the middle of DC. And I wanted to be a writer.
Mm.
And I'm like, what the fuck am I doing here? And I think that's when I woke up and um, I remember when I was going to I studied for the law school boards, and all that shit. And I remember
Hmm.
I was going off to take the test the first time, and it came to me, I just want to see how far I can go. And
Yeah.
that was really my guidepost. I never had any particular thing in mind. I mean, I knew what I liked to do. Sort of like I liked anthropology. I like going to
Sure.
live with other groups of people. I sort of grew up in a closely knit Jewish community where my parents were from somewhere else in the South, and we didn't quite fit in. So I grew up with a sense of otherness. So I enjoy otherness, and I think it's one thing that really is lacking in our whole world today, that people are afraid of the others instead
Mm.
of how fascinating they can be, no matter who they are. I mean, I've lived with everyone from a Hispanic crack gang to the Aryan Nations to a 17-year-old high school kid in Orange County, and that's more what I did. I've done some musicians, and I've done that, but mostly what I did was I went to the Washington Post. I'd never read a newspaper before. I told my parents I'd the law school class was holding a place open for me for the next year, so it was do or die,
Right.
for a young Jewish boy who just lied to his parents. And um, anyway, the Post taught me. It became kind of cute that I was the first white male in 20 years to work his way up from copy boy to reporter. And as it happened, the person I was trying to impress was Bob Woodward from Woodward and Bernstein. And
Right.
he was the Metro editor, and he was the guy who finally, after like at night, I would work this menial job, and then in the day, I would go out and try to report stories. And then I finally like broke a story, and Woodward hired me. And so it was sort of like once I got to the Post, it was like ramming something with my head, like the ant in that old Jiminy Cricket song, I think.
Yeah.
Um, um, and the Post was good because that's sort of like I had a focus. I guess it was a lot. I think in later days I would do a lot of reporting on the military because I come from a Marine family, but I was the one who didn't go to, you know, Randolph Macon Academy and didn't join the Marines, and I was the one who did other. Um, but the single-mindedness of purpose of that sort of training, sort of,
Yeah.
was always resonant with me, and meeting lots of different kinds of people, and then being able to uh, what I call suspend my disbelief. It's really about, my parents love me, so I have an ability to listen to other people that I don't agree with. Like, I don't yell back at the TV, and I do what the art of war teaches you, which is listen to your enemies if they're your enemies. I consider no one my enemy. unless they do something to me personally.
Sure.
So,
Right.
and I'm willing to listen. And even if I leave, I used to be able to go home and then, all right, so I sat around with the Aryan nations. I'm a Jew. I have a multiracial kid. They called him the mud race. And, the Jews were the kikes. I mean, it was the one time in my career that I had um, lied about my heritage when the guy in the brown uniform with the leather like strap across it, he says, "Are you a Jew?" And I said, "No, I'd done my homework, so I knew that Italians were, Aryan nations too." So I said I was Italian, and I kind of passed for that. That's the only time, but um, so that's what I've done, and all my stories are sort of like, um, you know, I started out doing the crime, and then in later years, because anybody would let me go live with a crack gang, they wouldn't let me go live with a 17-year-old until much later when an editor understood that the kind of work I was doing. But I'm sort of rambling on here, but that's what I do. But I think that working at the Washington Post, I got that like the basic training of news gathering,
Mm.
two sources, all the
Yeah.
things that the news was before it was fake news, it was real news. And yes, it was a little culturally biased, and yes, it was a little like white and Jewish. But then again, it was always hard to diversify the newsroom because you had to kind of like be smart enough to be a good journalist, but you also had to not care about money because they didn't pay you. And if you're from a minority group and you became the smart one who, got good schooling and all that stuff, you're not going to go get a low paying job. You're
Right.
going to go be the lawyer. you know so you're not going to quit law school, you're going to stay in there. So anyway, I built upon everything they taught me there, and I also had a literary bent. And
Mm.
what I discovered was, I was a creative writing minor in college, but I had nothing to say. So but then I discovered journalism, and the something to say was you just had to go find it like an Easter egg hunt. And then
Oh,
you could just bring it back. And I even call it, when I teach, my bowl of details. You find all these pieces and you put it together. And then you use your creativity to create, like, what for me was, before there were reality shows, there were my stories. And which is like, you're there. It has nothing to do
yeah.
with me, though. I'm not in the
Right.
story. Once in a while, at the end of a story, if I'm dealing with a person like, I don't know if you remember Todd Marinovich. He was known as
Mm.
Robo QB when he
Sure.
was 16, and so I spent all this time with him. And at the end of the, and, he broke all the records at USC. Then he broke records as a Raider rookie, and then he became like a meth and heroin addict for like 18 years. And
Yeah.
an interesting story, because one thing it taught me was like, like Billie Holiday, like all these other great like artists that were sort of addicted themselves to drugs to sort of get out of doing what they were good at.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was a very interesting sort of realization, um, meeting him. But
Yeah.
anyway,
But that's the thing, right? So, my background is similar to yours in that I was a spy. My job, it's a journalist job. My job is to go, I don't know anybody here. So if I don't leave the camp today and go talk to someone new, I'm not doing my job. And then you just start building all these stories, right? And so, and maybe the one difference is I had to write a report, almost every day, because you got to justify your work, and you're also trying to give the commander information, and you don't know what they need. And so I would write down what I saw and heard, and then I would tell you what I thought about it. And that part would be short for the most part until I got more context. Then it would get longer and more in depth. And I would have people absolutely question what I saw and experienced, even though we were on the same patrol. And they're like, that's not what I heard. And I'm like, well, look, my job is to see what you don't see. You know, my job is to ask questions you're not going to ask. So you
Right.
are thinking about your project that you're trying to work on and you want it to work. I'm not looking at that. I'm talking to the people about your project, and they
Right.
have a different point of view. It doesn't matter if you agree with what they said it. And the commander needs to know that, right? And so
Right.
I'm telling these stories, and then the meta analysis part comes in, and I mean meta in the actual, not the modern definition where it means personal. I mean, you take this village and that village over in Iraq that I used to go to, this village here, and you begin to develop some wisdom and some foresight. And boy,
That's
oh
why
boy,
I always had a, I mean, by necessity, everybody's the kind of reporter that they are because you're
right,
using yourself. Now, on the one hand, I was um, one of the first people to like in the civilian world to shave his head. I lost all my hair at like 22. By
right,
30, I was growing a rat tail. It was 1986, and I'm like,
yeah,
stop, stop! You must
stop.
stop yourself.
You and
So
Kareem shaved your hair around the same time.
yeah, it was yeah. So there was like very few people like that, and I was very kind of dark complected and dark beard, and
Mhm.
so criminals thought I was a cop, and cops thought I was a criminal. But the
Yeah.
one thing they couldn't do was prejudge me. So if I could go in somewhere and just disarm someone, and then they would have no prejudice about me. I remember going to an assignment in Midlothian, Texas, and I'm like wearing all black, and I've got a shaved head and an earring, and like I'm walking into this motel in a hick town, and
Yeah.
the lady looks up at me like horrified, and it was raining outside, so I reached up and I wiped the water off my head. I said, "My head's wet," and smiled real big. And then she was my best friend. Like it broke the ice of like,
Yeah.
what do I expect out of this encounter? But
Right.
more to the point is, um, I was always sort of, socially anxious. Perhaps I'm not really. As a writer, you just want to stay in a room and write. You're not really
Mm-hmm.
becoming a reporter is a whole other talent. And so um, my reporting technique became just going there and being like nice and just sitting there and shutting up. And
Yeah.
like if something dropped, I would pick it up. Or if we went to dinner, I would buy dinner. That was good in a lot of quarters. But this idea that I would just like go in without any judgment. And
Mm-hmm.
I have this wonderful thing on my wall from a former porn star named Asia Carrera. She was well known as as like the first Asian porn star back in the day. I had done a
Yeah.
story by after my divorce, soon after my divorce, this mentee of mine who had become an editor of Playboy sort of wanted to help me out, I guess. So he sent me on the road to look for all these old retired porn starlets, and Asia Carrera was really the one he was in love with. And editors are probably like commanders and generals. They use you as the cannon fodder to bring back what they want to know. I once had an editor bring me to the same town he was in to write about um, University of Tennessee coach Pat Head,
Okay.
and he was like the hugest fan of the Tennessee Volunteers, the women's. She was like the
Yeah.
first big, well-known women's coach. And
For
this
sure.
guy
Yeah.
was in a magazine in I think it was Knoxville, right? Um, and so I told him, I'm here just because my editor loves you. And we invited the editor. She said, well, he can sit on the bench. And he's like, oh, no, it's okay. you know, and maybe that's how generals are too. Some of them don't want to go out there. Um,
Yeah.
but, you get in with the people and then you learn this great thing. And that is on
Mm-hmm.
some level, no matter how fucking crazy they are, because nobody makes a good story if they're not kind of a narcissist. So you have to really put up with a lot of that. But
Right.
still, no matter what, there's a universalism. Like when I was talking to the founder of the Aryan Nations, I later found out by hanging out for a while that his wife was back in the next cabin, like dying of cancer. And,
Mm.
he was a sad old guy losing the woman he'd loved his whole life. And
Yeah.
even if he was a crazy fucking white supremacist, like he was still a human. And
Yeah.
that's like that little teeny piece that we lose. Like, I think with all the divide of all the people in our country, there's not any sense that they're both humans. And that's
Yep.
really what I learned doing my job all through the years. And learning that, like,
Yeah.
not only sort of made me a weirdo because, like, I believe some things that this person believes. It's like the butterfly effect of beliefs,
Mm. Hmm.
the
Hmm.
like when I was in Nepal, like, and I close to the Nepalese guy, and he's walking me through the mountains for 6 weeks with this group of doctors, and that point of view comes up with like some kid in a gang who, like, I remember these kids fighting pit bulls in North Philly, 13 years old. Rolling Stone sends me there because there's a headline in the Wall Street Journal about kids fighting pit bulls in ghetto, hanging them. The losers would be hung by, like, using the wire they'd stripped out of these old in this the blown out North Philly ghetto where
Hmm. Yeah.
much of the industrial, it was the beginning of the Rust Belt up there, but the people who occupied the place were Puerto Ricans and black people, and there was this pit bull culture, and so they never even heard of Rolling Stone magazine. I mean,
Right.
it's like this notion that I remember I was doing the gang story, and I'm living with this guy is his name is Sleeper. He's a heroin
Mm.
addict, and it's this once proud Hispanic gang. Used to be the Cholos, the heroin. They used to deal the heroin to the black people across the street. Well, crack like flipped it over, and they
Mm.
became the addicts, and the black people, the shoreline Crips across the street, became the dealers, and it
Yeah.
was like an incredible, like, situation. So anyway, this one guy, Sleeper, I'm hanging with him because you need a spirit guide whenever you go
Right.
into a place. You don't go to a fraternity party without someone taking you there. You don't just fucking show up like, what is this person doing there?
Yeah.
So, but I remember sitting with her, and she's like, they've got a kid, and she's like 15. And I'm like, I remember so clearly sitting this was also interesting because in the early days of going to South Central, coming from the East Coast, I'm like, this is a
Hmm.
ghetto. I'm like sitting at the picnic table,
Yeah.
like in the yard. It's not like groomed or anything.
Right.
Um, I guess the gardeners never. This is a bad. But um, I said to her, a lot of people I know would call you an unwed mother and would say you're 15 and you shouldn't have a kid. And she, like, laughs. And she says, I've been taking care of kids since I was like 3, I mean, and it's just so interesting. I think it's
Yeah.
at once what for a person like me makes this country really super cool. Like, I could spend my whole life being a foreign correspondent. My particular talent depended on me empathizing with people, and
Sure.
I had to speak their language. So
Yeah.
I had to work in America. Like, of the few times I went away, like to I lived in, the West Bank in Gaza. I lived in that fucking beach camp. I was like a Jew in the beach camp for like a week. Like,
Mm.
nobody knew who I was. Um, but uh, I forgot which rant I was on. So,
Well, let me
it
jump
is
in.
just,
Yeah.
please.
I was going to
please.
jump in and talk because there's a great comparison
I'll
here.
tend to talk till I, peter out.
Yeah, you're fine. You're the guest, but I thought I might take and color with you with this. So, I would go out into these areas far flung, and my job is to find out like wherever the commander's interested in knowing things, and not just the commander, but like the entire organization. So I'm thinking in multiple spheres, I guess, And so I'm trying to talk to an audience that I don't ever know, ever get to talk to, and I'm trying to write clear sentences. But you come across these guys, maybe they're a warlord, maybe they're a farmer, and we'll put these people as Americans, we'll put these people in pretty tight boxes. This is who they are. This is what they like. This is what they know. And I go there. I don't do that. I call it my version of tabula rasa, this blank slate. And I'm like, tell me about whatever. Even if I know all about Ramadan, I want to know about their Ramadan.
Yeah.
And none of my ego goes into this as much as I can, right? Like I can try to control that thing. And so I get really good at seeing what's there and getting people to open up because there's universal truths. You were just talking
Well,
about
that's
this.
what I maintain is the problem that we have here in America
Okay.
is that people do not have this skill. It's too personal. Um, it's like it's not a football game. This is life.
Yeah.
We all live here, and what's
Yeah.
wrong with being kind to people a little bit?
Sure.
And
Sure.
there's the if you want to have a different point of view, great. But like, why is everybody gotta like also sort of make shit of everybody else and look down upon everybody else? And I think
Yeah.
both sides are equally guilty of it. It's not
Yeah.
one side or the other. I mean, you could see this as a person who, walked among the villages, because I would always
Mm,
go to places in America which were, you know, exactly what we're talking, different kind of people. I mean,
yeah.
I also spent like a bunch of time with a cowboy, down in Texas. So,
Yeah.
I don't discriminate in who, in whose point of view it is. I just want to know everyone's point of view. And I find it extremely difficult sometimes to fit in with the general public where it's everybody's in a football game.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I hate this one and I hate that one. And, Tom Brady beat our team 100 times, so I hate him.
Right.
Personally, I fucking admire that. It's sort of
Yeah.
like our country loves underdogs. And what's wrong with being the overdog, working hard? Like I wrote about Kobe. I think I'm the one who spent the most time with him as a journalist. And by the
Hmm.
way, the difference between what we did was I gathered a lot of information when I was there. I always had my tape recorder running, um, but I didn't write anything until I was done. I mean, I
Mm,
remember the first time I was with the Marines. I'm just instinctively taping because I don't understand one word anybody's fucking saying. But
yeah.
after like a couple months of being there, then I'm home transcribing. I'm like, oh, I learned the vocabulary. I learned and even, one of the earliest things I did was a story called Hunting Marlon Brando. The
Mm,
Washington Post sent me to look for him when he was like the biggest star of all time. And a interesting part of his thing was his method acting to me.
right.
And so as I went forward, I gave my self permission to sort of like always be me, but only less so.
Mm,
You never, I mean, even a fucking dog knows when you're not being you. But
right.
like, you don't have to have your needs. It's like, I don't have my fucking needs.
Right.
All I have is like, I'll have what he's had. Like
Right.
that's my whole fucking like point of view, and that way, that's why you learn different things. And
Yes.
that also may make me a little bit of a misanthrope in our day and age. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't
But
think it's so bad that different people can. I fucking love different people. I get
yeah.
bored by the same thing.
Yeah. 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 I'm the same way. I When I go somewhere, I want to eat what you like. One of the best things, these are universal truths. Everybody hates cancer. Everybody loves their kids. Everybody's, for the most part, doing their best at any given time, right? And If you're in someone else's, whether you're in Kansas or in Kandahar, if you go to someone's house, they want to show you what they make. You're from America? You're from California? You're from wherever you're from? You're here in my house? Oh man, yeah, I'm gonna make you my lasagna. They want to make their very best thing. Like, what's the coolest thing in this town? Oh man, let me show you what it. Sometimes you get, oh, there's nothing cool here. That's fine. That's a starting point for a different conversation. But that ability to experience what their Christmas is, what their Ramadan is, whatever it is, and allow that to be them, then that allows you to ask those questions, even if you think you know the answer. And the thing I always say to people trying to learn how to do this is, don't try to Iraq on Iraqi. Sure, be prepared, but let them be the expert. Let them be the passionate one, because then they'll crack open and they'll start telling you everything, because you're just like, tell me more. What's your opinion about this? How does this
Well,
work?
also sometimes you're in a situation where if you don't let them be that, you could die. I mean,
Oh, there's
when I
that
was living
too.
with
Yeah.
the crack gang, you know, at one point I was gonna like have a party for the homeboy. You should see my expense account for Rolling Stone. God
Mm.
bless Jan Wenner. My expense was like crack. No,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I had crack and groceries, and then my motel bill. I lived in this shitty motel off to the side, but um, if you didn't, if you had to like kind of like, it didn't matter that I'd gone to college and that they didn't know English very well.
Right.
When I was in Venice, and it's weird now because a lot of Venice has become upscale, and I even worked at a website years later. Like I would go like leave the office of the website and go up to this corner of Electric Avenue and smoke a little one hitter before going back to work. And and it was like, whoa, the flashback of what it looked like. I mean, when it was dark and everybody was selling crack in the corners, you
Yeah.
know, it was like a dangerous place. And so you had to abide by their rules. And like there was this one time, I said I was going to have a party for the guys, and so there was only one guy in the gang was an actual dealer, Rock, great name, right? And this was back in the early days, early days of what. Around 87, and
Okay.
like people would still like carry the crack in their mouth, it was
Oh
like
yeah, yeah.
that. It was. And so we got, I got like I don't know, I think I got a quarter from Rock. I said, Rolling Stone will give us a party. And he like absconded with the money, and the rest of the homeboys were like, first of all, they were pissed they weren't going to be getting high.
Right.
um And but second of all, they were embarrassed. And
Mm.
I was up all night talking Sleeper out of track. We found him. I was up all night talking Sleeper out of killing the guy. I said, you cannot kill a guy on behalf of ripping off a Rolling Stone reporter, okay? That's just not
You
going,
can't do it.
it's
I'm
like
not gonna let
my
it happen.
world and his world. And,
Right.
I had to like kind of explain that to him. And while I'm talking, I have to tell you though, I'm with these homeboys. They're all poor. They're like going to their grandmothers and getting $10 for an asthma inhaler so they could buy a little rock. Meanwhile, after I get ripped off, there's all these women in the community who are, like uh, 20s and 30s and have jobs, and they have like Japanese cars, and they have the money in the community, and they're usually, it was very interesting doing the anthropology of learning that how different groups live. They live in family groups,
Yeah.
and it's just like white people are different. People are different. That's what they do.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, one night, these I'd met the women because we'd always go to different places to eat and stuff like that. And if you wanted to eat, you just showed up at somebody's house at dinner time. And so they invited me to their own like Saturday night girls' night crack party, and
Hmm.
they all had 50s. You know, they weren't messing around at all. So the most fucked up I ever got in this assignment was partying with the women who had jobs. Um, so it
That's
was quite a
hilarious.
girls' night.
Yeah, yeah.
But
When
anyway, the
you,
point
yeah,
being that you abided by the rules of the joint. Where you went,
right,
you know,
yeah.
you could put yourself second for a while.
And it's okay to not know the rules. This is from my point of view, from my experience. You can ask, like folks often in the military side of things, we, like, how do we not offend someone with culture? Make sure you don't use your hands, don't show the bottom of your feet. But you learned over time, like, okay, everybody in Iraq knows that I'm probably a Christian and I'm probably not Muslim. They don't expect me to be Muslim. They'd be blown away if I said that, right? And so when you go to eat something, I'm like, hey, I eat left-handed. Do you guys care about that? Like, Pete, you're from California. We know you're not like us. It's fine. And don't worry about the bottom of your feet if you're going to ask about that. And so they'll
Right.
tell you things and you'll appreciate. So it's Ramadan, and I'm trying to gently educate the commander that I'm working with, because he's a little bit older than me, but we're both very seasoned. And so he's very set in his ways. And I want him to nudge over a little bit. And so it's Ramadan. And I say to look, I know the scenario of this whole thing. I already know what's going to happen. So I say, hey, it's Ramadan. If I was to drink some water from a canteen, and normally I didn't even bring a canteen with me, but I wanted to have the prop there. That'd be a big deal. And he's like, Pete, but we have whiskey instead. And he pulls his drawer open. This is a Iraqi commander during Ramadan, right? And one of my rules is, and I bet you have this rule too, is when someone offers you booze, you take it. You're like, hell yeah, let's go. Let's rip it. And I don't care if it's mouth, like you and me style out of a bottle. That's fine. That's part of what they do. But that little nudge obviously connects me to that commander. That's an easy, that's a give me. But the American commander next to me, he gets to see like, oh man, there's a different level of this game here, because I'm great at my job. He's great at his job, but we don't have the same job. And so when I show him what I'm doing, that allows him to give me more freedom to do,
Right.
because he's my editor, right? And he's like, nah, I see what you're doing. Let's get you more access to the battlefield.
Well, you were behind the lines. I think our commonality here is that you go where other different people don't go within the culture,
Right.
and by going there, there's never one person who does not appreciate. Oh, they're not so bad. They're like kind of
Right.
cool.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like everybody, I know one of this race. He's pretty good.
Yeah.
Oh, I hate
Yeah.
the rest of them, but this guy, he's cool. And
Yeah.
so I mean, that's what people see. So
Yep.
you get enriched by your experience to the extent that it leads you to have a podcast where you're always like, you
Yeah.
know, checking out the village, like
Yeah.
whatever that
Right.
village
Yeah.
is. The village of
And
Mike. Here I am.
if I've done my job well, I'm leaving a wake of satisfied people that I've connected with. And you get better at this as you get older. But that village where there might be harm one day, I always call myself like, my job is to be Johnny Good Times. So I go down and I go to the barbershop, I'll go to the liquor store, and I try to stir up some of an excitement so that the next time an American comes, like we always walk around like this, we got our sunglasses on. And I'm like, hey, smile and wave. Everybody smile and wave,
Yeah.
because you don't know who you're encountering. You don't know who you're pissing off. Yes, be in a combat posture, but smile and wave. I'm the first guy to take my gear off. I'm like, if there's ladies over there with no gear on and they're locals, I need to be at their level, because they're
Right.
exposing themselves to threat that we're terrified of. We have to not everybody, but my job, strip it off, get the helmet off, be Pete and not be Sergeant so-and-so, and that enabled me again to make connections. And let me go a little bit longer here. One of the things I would do is I would find the local VIPs in the area, and I'd want to meet them in a different way. And so I would, on the American side of the camp, I would set everything up. And this is a process to get them to realize that when I bring Mike, my friend Mike, Shake Mike, onto the camp, he's an important man. You're not going to search him. As a matter of fact, you're going to treat him like a VIP because everywhere else in this town he is. And so you're going to get a position of attention. You're going to salute and you're going to say, welcome to camp, whatever it is. And you're going to come on. He's going to be my VIP guest. I also tell the commander right around 3:30, I'm going to be in the chow hall with Shake Mike. And we're going to sit there and we're going to have food. And you're going to get in there. You're going to see air conditioning, electricity everywhere, all of these vehicles, all this American splendor. And then I'm going to say, feast your eyes about this chow hall. Fill your pockets, take stuff home for your kids. Don't be shy about it. We got you covered. And that guy's like, what? It blows his mind. And by the way, because he's important, his phone is nonstop ringing. And it's like, yep, he gives it to his assistant. And his assistant's like, yes, you had a kid. Okay, his name's Mc-. And so like this all the time, handle and shake shit, right? And so that intel that we never get. And then the commander comes by because I've cued him to come by. And he's like, who's this? I'm like, this is Shake Mike. Oh my gosh. I've heard about you. Oh, you're a great guy. And so now it all goes together, and it allows me to meet people that no one else can meet because I've become this guy that's like, hey, Pete will give you muffins and ice cream. You should go meet with him. And they're never a threat when they're on the camp. They have too much. It just doesn't make any sense for them. Like, now I'm going to get them. You're like, no, that isn't what they do. What they do is go, oh, thank God, I get to do something different. I get to be a VIP, all these things. And that's sort of what we do is find ways to create people who are comfortable, and we allow them to be themselves. We give them respect, allow them to be experts.
Well, I mean, in my case, I'm getting paid to do that. And I think I also got paid in the something to say part because, I've said it before, but I feel like a lot of what I did was, like an Easter egg hunt. You're going, finding all these pieces, putting in the bowl, and coming home, and then those pieces become kind of like pieces of me.
Mm-hmm.
And once you're there, you don't forget the lessons you've learned, and they become part of your character, and they help you in the next instance. And for me, it wasn't like a life or death. Well, it depended on the story, but as I got older and moved on from Rolling Stone and had a kid and stuff and went to GQ and then Esquire, where I sort of did the same work, but after a time I was, I wrote some interesting stories for Esquire about an ugly guy. What was it in an ugly guy in Hollywood?
Yeah.
What was it like to be on, you got to sort of look at like the high school kid, the 17-year-old, you got to look at, usually the story is always high school's out and this is our summer before college. But instead, this was like the kid who's at 17, he's like the top kid. This is the last year of your life where you don't have to give a shit about hardly anything except the PSATs. And so there's like, I also wrote a really great story I loved about, it was called The Secret Life of a Beautiful Woman. And the person I met turned out to be Brooke Burke, if you remember her from her series of things. But at the time, she was just kind of like a underwear model and engaged to a plastic surgeon. And I spent a couple months like hanging out with her and all her Playboy friends and this and that. And she was really good at being her. She was a little bit, oh, that's fun. They were like, like that. But it's fine. That's how they are. That's how they were. She was beautiful. And she's still to this day, I don't know, she must be in her 50s by now, but she's got like 2 different like workout channels going on Instagram, and she looks pretty amazing. So she's, I'm sure a lot of it has to do with some work she's had done, but she's still like working that product. And you got to give them credit for that. You got to give people credit for that. Even if you think, oh, she's Brooke Burke. How could you be that person? Well, she was born beautiful and that's what she got. So she used it. And
Yeah.
to me, that's one of my favorite stories was about Kobe for that reason. And it's when
Mm.
I hooked up with Kobe back at that season when everybody hated him. Remember, they
Yeah.
traded Shaq, and he had that thing in Colorado, and
Yeah.
then he was like thinking about leaving the Lakers, and everybody fucking hated Kobe. And but I met Kobe, and I would go to his workouts, and I couldn't fucking believe that. Nobody knew about this whole, like, nobody in the league was like talking about their 1,000 shots like before Kobe. Kobe
Right.
was doing all that, and I spent like a week with him, and I came to really like relate to him on that level because like I will write a sentence until it's perfect,
Yeah.
and I love it. I fucking love it. I don't find it. I'm not trying to get finished. Like
Mm.
I'm just trying to do the process instead of the product. And
Right.
and so people who bring that to whatever they do are like valuable to meet. No matter what their various stripe or where they're coming from or what group they're from. I mean, there's universalisms between everyone.
Oh, for sure.
So
Yeah. Yeah. You and I have both discovered them because on your website. So everybody can go to the website, and I'll put the link up here so you guys can see it. But you give tips on writing, reporting, and all I have to do is start looking at two, and then I'll be like, "Yep, that's 100% right," because we both have written for a living, we both have done reporting for a living. Slightly different cases, but employ the pregnant pause. Man, the best question is no question at all, just silence, and they'll be desperate to fill it.
And boy, is it useful too, because when like sometimes you have no fucking clue what to ask. I mean, that's my whole philosophy is based on reporting philosophy is based on I don't fucking know. I mean, so many times I've gone into a situation where I read all the like one of the stories I wrote was a called Death of a High School Narc. It happened, I said, in Midlothian, Texas. And I read all this stuff from the Dallas papers. It wasn't far from Dallas, and all that. And it was being called an occult murder.
Mm,
There was all this like talk of like these kids killed this narc in the high school, and there was
yeah.
like pentagrams and animal sacrifices and this, that, and the other. So I get down there, and it was really great because it was a time before the high schools were like, or maybe it was bad, but it was a time before the high schools were like encircled in cyclone fences, and I could just walk on the parking lot. And I met some kids, and they said, yeah, they knew about it was like a policeman's son had killed this narc they put in the high school. Basically,
Yeah.
that was the story. And now there were three people involved, and two of them were in jail. And I meet this girl in the parking lot, and she says, well, we'll meet you at Whataburger, after school, And so I go there, and she shows up with this other guy who turns out he was the driver in the car. I'm like, fuck. But the weird thing was, the first thing I noticed was they had, in high school, we called it, because we took Spanish, we called it El Cuaderno. It was your like loose leaf notebook, it was that blue
Hmm.
thing. And you like wrote on, and you like, some people were like out of control. Other people were super OCD about their Cuaderno. But anyway, these kids had pentagrams and AC/DC and Slayer, and they were not in the occult,
Yeah.
but that's what the news media, the early days of the Maury Povich fake news, when it became news started becoming fake.
Right.
It started becoming when news started becoming entertainment. That was the death knell. That and the existence of MySpace, which led to this sort of culture, which is great and terrible at the same time. For both of us, our culture is great because we can decide we want a book company or a podcast. There's
Hmm.
not like I come from the days where you sent out 30 letters, they said fuck you 30 times. You went to the next place, you wrote 100 stories before, you all the stuff I did at the Washington Post to make them hire me was, but it's great or it's bad to be able to use it. But as long as it's here, to be able to use it with some standards, and I think we're going in the right direction because we can't ignore it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for putting my stuff up.
Yeah, and for sure, everybody should check that out. Just there's all kinds of great tips in there. So if we just go to MikeSager.com and just feast your eyes, you guys will have plenty to look at. And
you should also, I
said,
as long as I'm on,
yeah,
I could be like a celebrity on the Jay Leno show. Watch my movie. No, I have a company called the Sager Group, and there it is. And we're called an indie hybrid. Which it's 13 years old. We've published over 130 books, and some of the books some of the books are just stone amateurs, and they've never written before. Everybody who works there is like from legacy media. It sort of started out in the beginning as a place for my friends to work when all the legacy media started dropping like flies, and then over time we've had some grants and we've had some affiliations, and so we collect a lot of great old like crime journalism, and we have the world's only 3-volume set of journalism by women. All the great women, from Joan Didion to Susan Orlean to E. Jean Carroll. All of them are collected. So we do a lot of stuff, and then so we solicit amateurs, and then we try to get some names to come in, and we sort of have a whole kind of hybrid way of doing things. So if you have a book, come see me. That's what I'm spending my semi-retirement doing. I am no longer chasing after crack gangs.
No,
no, I have to take too many meds.
Yeah, it's hard work.
My heart would burst if I did crack, but I'm glad I lived through it.
Yeah. Please.
It was an adulterated form of the good stuff, which was called freebase in the days before that. But that's another discussion.
That's another discussion. Actually, I just did a show a little while ago that I produced with 2 very notorious drug smugglers, and they were talking about the 70s and 80s, and just all the things, the craziness, all the wild things that they got to do because they lived this wild rock and roll life. And you meet people in your life, and you're like, oh, you don't live on this planet with the rest of us. You have whatever it is, whether you're a drug smuggler, a rock star, whatever it is. They'll tell you these stories, and you're like, that's not a possible story for anybody else. Like, you can't even. And in the combat world, same thing, where I'll say something and I'm like, the words I'm saying out loud, you can't even understand what I'm saying because there's different rules in these different environments.
Yeah. Do you what do you do? What do you do to like make your way in the world? Because you're not over there anymore. It's like, and I'm not over there anymore either, so to speak. So how do you fit in? How do you fit into like everybody else? Or do you just stay in your little dark podcast room there?
Yeah. I love to be on the road. I love to be. I love going out places, still meeting people and thinking about it. Sometimes I write about it. Sometimes I don't. I'm not required to put anything out because I'm a boss, right? But I went out to Big Bend area in Texas, way deep out in West Texas. And I just met the most remarkable people because they get there for a variety of reasons. Either they were born there, they don't know how to leave, or their life falls apart when they're there and they don't know how to leave, or they just don't want anybody near them. They just have, and you find these remarkable places. You remember Charles Kuralt's old show, Sunday Morning. it's a very similar thing, but just a little more maybe edge and roughness and a little less music and babbling brooks, you know.
Yeah.
And if I could do more of that, I would. It's just, you know, that's it's a big lift in terms of effort, in terms of money, in terms of time. And then
You need a bus.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
what's his
Well, and
name?
also
John
someone
Madden
that's like,
or BB
yeah,
King.
yeah, BBK or Willie. But places like Esquire don't pay you to do these things anymore, really, not in a way that makes it worthwhile. And so,
No.
you know, I would still do some of that stuff. I don't mind getting in my
I
truck. I
just
don't mind sitting in the
recently
back of it.
I just recently I think put the last nail in my journalism for hire
Yeah.
um, story that started in 1977. I think was the first time I got paid to write thing. I've gotten paid every year since to write something, and
Yeah.
I was kind of planning on seeing how long I could keep that going.
Yeah.
And last December, I published a piece in Los Angeles Magazine.
Hmm.
They just been taken over by new ownership, and I had written for the old ownership, but they said they wanted my piece. I just got the check. I just got the check. So
Yeah. That's it.
I feel bad for freelancers today.
Yeah.
But I feel blessed to have done it,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
that they would pay me all this money to spend months like figuring out how almonds grow.
Sure.
I did a piece about the drought, and I like sort of embedded was not a word when I started. That's what I did. I
Hmm.
embedded. So I
Hmm.
embedded with
Hmm.
this farmer, this almond farmer. And, it's like you got to like just leave your own world and get interested in something else. And it was always so refreshing. I mean, you always came back, you had to filter it through the narcissism or onanism of your typing, you know.
Right.
But that's the point. You go out, you gather, you come back, you pour it out, and and I think everybody's better for it. I mean, I have a whole sheath of books on MikeSager.com. If you want to read a bunch of stuff, there's like everything from the crack gang to I wrote the first story about ice. I went to Hawaii to write about ice, and I came back and I testified at the first congressional hearing on ice, methamphetamine in that
Yeah.
smokable form. And
Right.
my thought was, as I was sitting up there in Congress, was if they have to ask me, they are fucked. Like, like,
Right.
but
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff. Most of I started in writing magazine pieces in '84. So if you like the '80s and '90s and all that stuff that went on, it was a great time to be, and really my reaction was at the Washington Post, I was not an Ivy Leaguer.
Mm.
So,
Hmm.
but what I was a druggie. So and they were not. And
Hmm.
so I could like, that's what I had to sell. I could,
Right.
pass myself off in the world. I mean, Washington was a much different world. There, the murder capital of the world at the time. And you had to go into some neighborhoods, that nobody else would go into. But, that's where the beginning of this whole thing would, start out with.
Right.
Um, so
Yeah.
we could use a little more of that today. That's going to be my theme. I want to be your
Yeah.
bleeding heart liberal guest.
Yeah.
Um, Although I think I'm sort of like there should be a no word like a consensual libertarian or something like where
Oh, right.
everybody should just be able to be themselves, and we should all be able to get along regardless
Right.
of whether
Right.
you like rice or noodles, or
Right.
potatoes. Like, what the
Yeah.
fuck's the difference? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Or both. How about I like
as long as
both?
it's all
You
not
know?
in the same apartment building, I think that sometimes that can be a lot. Like,
Yeah. It is. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's better because you can invent your own system, your own business. You can go out and do the same thing you did to get your job at the Post. You can do that and build your own Substack following. Way easier said than done, but also you get to keep what you kill. And there's something to be said for that these days too. And it doesn't have to just be a Substack or a Medium column.
Right.
It can be video. It can be, I mean, it can be something like this.
I think the difference is
Yeah.
there's a sense today that you're drowning in it, and I'm intimidated by that.
Yeah.
I think it's because, you know, I was a little spoiled because I would be able to spend all this time in the field and spend all this time in my, I mean, I would spend 3 weeks transcribing tapes. I mean,
Mm.
just every day, like 8 hours a day, I'd come to my office and go to lunch for 5 minutes, come back, type more. But
Hmm.
the world was much smaller, so I would
Yeah.
write this story and I'd put every ounce of effort into how well it was written, and it would be edited, and then like it would be published and I'd like drop the mic.
Yeah.
And then the PR department at Rolling Stone would say, "Oh, would you please go on the Today Show?" Nowadays, like everybody wants to be on Oprah, you know what I mean? It's sort of like
Yeah.
everybody's like, and I had to take that up too, you know, this whole self-promotion thing.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not really good at it, but I know
Mm.
some people really are, and it's like
Yeah.
it's a secret, you know, and but
Yeah.
it's for some reason I don't feel like that's my milieu. My milieu is in other places more where
Yeah.
it's it's blank screens filling up with words,
Right.
or blank pages like becoming covers of books, which
Sure.
is
Sure.
sort of my new, you know, when like a businessman becomes like a gardener and he thinks he's like the best gardener in the world.
Yeah.
Like, and it's embarrassing. Well, I love doing covers with my work wife,
Yeah.
Yuri,
They're
in
great. Everybody
Nagasaki.
should. Let me put the
Um,
link on here. Go check out the books
anyway,
and
so
there are the
I
covers.
enjoy doing that, and I also enjoy helping people. My dad was an OBGYN, and I've kind of figured out that I'm that for authors.
Mm.
I help them
Mm.
deliver their baby, and it's very it's enriching in all directions. And I think because
Hmm.
it's after years of supplicating to the higher up and the lowers down, you know, the editors and the sources, now I'm like the king, and I can just bestow my graces upon people as I wish. And I don't even have to leave my room most of the time. And
Yeah.
it's great knowing people because, you know, when you work with people's writing, it's very intimate. Like when you're
Yeah.
sticking your hands in their words, it's kind of like it's like a emotional version of sex. Like,
Yeah.
you know, you are
Yeah.
in deep, and
Yeah.
so I think it's very rewarding to do, and I think it's also sort of this idea of what you were starting out saying before is like adaptation. You
Yeah.
adapt or die. You know, you find what it is you can do, and if you can learn to, I have this thing I call the theory of originals,
Oh.
and you try to be number one in a class of one. You don't
Hmm.
compete. You know, the image from the olden days being you go to college registration day and there's tables everywhere, and this table's long and that table's long, so you just go to the fucking short table. You know, you find your
Yeah.
own way to do something. And
So true.
that's really what I did to get my job. I did all these weird little things, like I would dress at night in my t-shirt collection with my moccasins at the Washington Post, and I would work in the wire room, and then I would go out drinking with the whoever would take me, and like the next morning I'd be in with my suit, you know, and it became this thing like, oh, your brother was working here this morning, you know. I mean, things that well of trying to make your mark, and I think that that's
Uh,
still the case. You have to find the best way of you doing things. You know, when I was in night
True.
police, I was trained by this brilliant journalist named Loretta Tafani, and she happened to be a little short Italian woman from Queens. I think her father was a firefighter, and you know, she was super smart and went to a good university and ended up winning the Pulitzer Prize for writing a story about men getting raped in the county jail. I mean, Loretta, she would wear these pencil skirts, and she said, really? I remember being with her in a shooting gallery, and she's going, oh, what does that feel like? You know, she was being her, and she could do it her way. I remember on night police, she would go around to all the different squads, and they'd let her right in because it was Loretta. When I took over her job, I had to get this great idea where they should send me down some early editions of the paper. So I would go from place to place and bribe them with papers to read because they were just sitting there in the squad room doing nothing. So it's sort of like you have to use what you got.
You do.
And,
you do. Yeah.
And I think that's a good rule to live with. And that's why, you know, all this stuff online is cool, because if you can figure it out, you know, go get them.
Yeah, absolutely. Go get them. Let me wrap this thing up, and then let's do another one soon, because this has been a lot of fun. But
sure, man. I really appreciate you.
Yeah. No, it's neat. I don't want to do it now, but I
should mention Scott's new company, which I can't remember the name of. Do you know?
I got it. I got you. Yeah, I got it. Yeah. Solid Copy.
Can you put that up?
Yeah. Yep. I'm going to do it right now. And so
please do it. You're really good with this shit.
Oh,
yeah,
man,
I'm hoping to work with Scott, who does a lot of great things with vets, and he's a literary agent, and he's got this new sort of thing where he helps people through books. So Solid Copy Media.
I'll be doing podcast. Yeah.
They have the best logo too.
Oh, yeah. Everybody go to the website. There's the link right there.
Yeah, check it out.
Solid Copy
and
Media.
Scott hooked us up, I should say. So I wanted to make sure not to be an asshole and mention that. Thank you so much for having me. I know I rambled on, but I guess that's
this is our time together, and you're supposed to talk, so you did it. Let me roll these credits. I'll be right back to you. Everybody else, I'll see you next.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much.